Well, hello, everyone. John DeJarley. I'm the Executive Director of the Indigenous Resource Network and excited for another episode of the Indigenous Voices and Resource Development Podcast. With me today, I have the CEO of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, Miss Chana Martineau. So welcome, Chana. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, John.
Yes.
And welcome to our home on Enoch Cree Nation.
I know, and it's such a cool honor to be here. We talked a little bit about this and we're with an Indigenous organization. We are working on Indigenous lands, and there's very capable and excited Indigenous people doing all sorts of things everywhere. And that's really cool.
Thank you. I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, awesome. And I want to talk a little bit more about that later. But one of the things I'd like to talk about first is you're a First Nation woman, a leader from Frog Lake First Nation. And we like to kind of figure out kinship, like connectedness, community, and things like that. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your ties to community, your kinship, and what that means for you.
Okay, thanks so much. And thanks so much for having me today. It's really exciting to join you and the network to have this conversation. I'm a member of Frog Lake First Nation. I'm proudly a Martineau. There's a long lineage of Martineaus. The first Martineau I discovered emigrated to Canada through Quebec in 1620. So when you think about it, not long after Christopher Columbus, 1492 and all of that. Yeah. And so I talk about, the Martineau name was really an original like Canadian name. And then the family moved across from Ile d'Orléans, moved across the west into Alberta. And so my great-grandfather started the Hudson's Bay Trading Post there in the late 1800s. There's a Martineau River, a Martineau area on the base in the Cold Lake area, all named after my family. So it's a heritage I'm very, very proud of. And we are a part of Big Bear's clan. We descend from Big Bear's clan. So there's a whole lot of us. People say to me, are you related to this Martineau or that Martineau? And I often say, well, probably, there's a good chance because we are from, some of the original colonial settlers here, but also a long line of Indigenous people. The Frog Lake Massacre was something that really deeply impacted our family on both sides, both the settler side and the colonial side. And so we've got a long and proud history in this part of the world.
Yeah, no kidding. That is like I said, and it's equally impressive that, you that history. Yeah. And then you honor it, right? And you talk about it and you talk about the kinship and connectedness. And you're right. There's, Dejoulets all over the place. Likewise.
Dejoulets from Frog Lake.
There is. Yeah. Yes, there is. And more into Alberta and everything like that. And so, there's, and then, it's one of the kind of endearing things about Indigenous people is when we get to, when we introduce ourselves and we talk to people, we talk about kinship, connectedness, community. Where are you from? Who's your family? We're probably related, right? And so that's super cool.
Can I tell you a funny story?
Please.
When I was a teenage girl or late teens, I went on a vacation with my friend and her family to Penticton, and we were camping. And so we got stopped by forest fire on the highway in BC. So I said, I'm just going to wander up and see how long this is, like how long the line is and how long we're going to be here. And then I ran into some of my cousins on the highway. And so I came back and they were like, well, where were you? Yeah. I said, there's some of my cousins are up in the car, about a mile up. There's a bunch of my cousins in a car. They're also camping. And they said, only you would run into family on some random highway in BC. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how we are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. And then, we keep those ties and we keep those connections, right? And that's one of the things that it's important to us. And
very special thing.
It is. Yeah. And it's not just that nuclear family, it's the extended family. We don't see ourselves in our immediate family. It's outside. Yeah. And that caring kind of moves through that, right? So you have a very successful career and it's easy to look at your resume and see that progression. And then that has evolved into, I think, where you are today, which is the CEO of an incredible organization doing incredible work. And so tell us a little bit about that journey and then what led you to take the role of leading AIFC.
Okay, that's a long one, but I'll tell you a little bit.
Yeah, that's the highlights.
And
probably a lot of those too.
Well, and you know what? One of the things that I think about is I think when you're younger in your career or you have a different path or your earlier stage, you look at someone who has a title like CEO and you wonder, wow, how did they get there? Right? I could never do that. And I was probably that person too. I never dreamt of being a CEO. I never thought I would be a CEO. But what I think happened along the way is just focused on the next best step. So I was always really mindful that I was born to a teenage mom in high school in
Mhm.
Cold Lake, Alberta. It was a big scandal.
Mhm.
Indigenous dad, mom in grade 12, so hadn't graduated yet, tried to hide her pregnancy and play basketball and
Yeah.
do all of the things, right? And my parents really, really struggled, really struggled. And so I was always really mindful of where I came from and how privileged I was to have the life that I had. So they worked very, very hard every day of their lives. I got the opportunity to go to university. I was the first person in my family to graduate from university in my extended family. My grandfather was one of 13. My dad's one of 7, and I was the first one. There's been more since and tons of success in that family, but was the first one. And I really wore that like a responsibility and a badge of honor. So one of the things that my parents really deeply instilled in me was work ethic. You work really hard at everything you do. You always give your best. Just okay is never good enough. And so I threw myself into the career. I was really determined not to be a teenage mom. And so maybe over rotated on that a little bit because, just, you all carry I guess the scars with you of your ancestors and your journey. And so you want to make sure that you do something to correct that. And so really doubled down on having a career. And in the 90s, we were in a massive recession and one of the worst in our history. And so I got a job with TD Bank. And so I started in banking, but because I had a job. And that was it. Thought about law school, different things. And then found that I really liked it. So just kept going. And I was really honored that they moved me along and kept advancing my career. And I really think about the power of sports and how the sporting participation, I was in figure skating and then I was a competitive curler, how those really lend itself well, the discipline, the training, goal orientation. So all of that lends itself well to your professional career later. And so really drew on those skills and the values that my parents brought me up with to just guide my career. So if I want to say one thing to your audience, it's you don't have to have everything figured out at the beginning. Take the next best step.
Yeah.
Follow your heart. Keep investing in yourself. I kept advancing my education. I did a financial planning designation and a securities designation and was always looking to continually improve. So that work ethic with continual improvement, it led to a ton of opportunities. And then seize those opportunities. You never know where they might lead you. And so when this opportunity came along, I was fully planning on retiring in banking again, was back in banking after a couple of tours, doing different things and was fully planning on retiring there. But I loved being on the board of the AIOC, so passionate about the mandate. And it was really my husband who believed in me and said, "Are you sure you don't want to put your name in for the CEO? Are you sure? Like you love this?" And so I did. And then I was in the chair before I knew it. And just sometimes I look around and think, wow, how did I get here? So it's just that take the next step, best step, keep investing in yourself and go to work and give it your best every day and get up the next day and do your best again.
That's incredible. And you mentioned something earlier in there, and we've talked about this in previous conversations. There was a drive coming from a sense of responsibility to do something, to that drove you to take that next best step, that drove you to continue to show up, right? And to continue to be engaged. And so, what can you tell us about that sense of responsibility, not just to yourself, but to your family and to community?
I don't even know if I can describe it. It's just so deeply ingrained in me that you give back. And I think that's really a part of the Indigenous culture. There's so many things that I learn now and into later adulthood that I didn't know were Indigenous ways when I was growing up. I just knew that was just how we did things as a family, right? And so, but that deep responsibility, that deep honor and commitment to you're charting a path here to help others. I really tried to find other ways to help Indigenous people through my volunteer work. I always thought working for corporate Canada, I have an opportunity to connect corporate resources and need in the Indigenous communities. But I never found the right thing that really clicked for me. I tried to find that through junior achievement. I tried to find that through some other volunteer work that I did, but didn't quite find the right thing. And so when this came along, it was like, finally, it's my finance career and my Indigenous heritage all rolled into one job. And so it's just who I am.
Yeah. And we talk to a lot of people and there's a lot of common threads and some incredibly powerful. And that's the one that I see that is consistent with a lot of Indigenous people that, that'll leave occupations because they can't reconcile or they can't really live their true selves and serve to the best of their abilities, right? And we see a lot of pivots as well, too. People working in technical roles that'll start to work more within kind of a social dynamic, right? In terms of leadership and engagement and things like that. But as we dig in, there's that sense of responsibility to serve, right? And career paths are charted, and we don't even know we're doing it, and we're choosing and we're doing all sorts of interesting, fun things, finance, did engineering and stuff. But it's like, how do we bring this back to that sense of service and responsibility, right?
And it's amazing how it can all come back together in the end. When I used to think that my career was disparate, I spent a bunch of time in accounting and in banking and investments, and then with an accounting firm, and then back in commercial banking. I felt like I had these tranches of my career that didn't make sense. But yet in this role, it all comes together in one way that I could never have dreamt of.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a really special thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and back to this one thing, AOIC's mandate, it spans not just natural resources, but includes agriculture, infrastructure, technology, healthcare, and more. So from your perspective, what are the most exciting opportunities right now for Indigenous communities?
I think this is a really exciting time. I think we're moving forward in Canada's economy in a way that we haven't in a long time. And so I think it's important. AIOC has a broad mandate so that we can support Indigenous people to invest where they want to invest. Now, in Alberta, a lot of that is tied to some sort of natural resource sector because that is where the economy is strong here. And so when we looked at the sectors underneath our mandate, we cover around 70% of the Alberta economy. So this will enable Indigenous communities to invest in sectors that matter to them and where the opportunities lie. And so I credit the Alberta government, honestly. They really see Indigenous communities as key to our economic future as a province. And so they want to enable that investment. And so that was how AIOC was created.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exciting. And I spend a lot of time across Canada, and it's fascinating. We get really engaged. You have a finance background, and we get really engaged in these conversations. But I think there's still quite a few Indigenous people and community that don't understand what the organization is and what it's doing and how it can serve them, right? And so what's a really kind of pared down version of what AIOC does?
Okay, sounds really good. So we use a loan guarantee. Our primary tool is a loan guarantee. We also provide capacity grants. One of the most important things is that we support nation and community level investment. So this is critical. We're not about supporting entrepreneurs. We're not supporting any one career. We're supporting nations and settlements. The Métis Nation also qualifies to be able to invest in large scale business to generate a return to fund their priorities, most importantly. So I liken it to co-signing on a loan. So if you ever needed some help from your parents or a trusted person in your network to make a large scale purchase like a home that is very much like what we do. And what happens is when the Alberta government steps in to support that debt, it is much easier for the nation to access. And when we think about these loans, they're on large things. So if you take a mortgage on a home, we finance mortgage-like instruments on power plants, pipelines, big infrastructure that generates stable cash flows so that the nation can count on those revenues and then use that money to then invest in other business ventures, social programs, and so on. So liken it to a co-signature on a loan. And then it makes that interest rate a lot lower. So the nations get to borrow at a cheaper rate than a typical business would. It's affordable. The business generates good returns. The nation makes money. And then they use that to fund everything else they need to do. Because as you know, all of the communities, both the Métis and the First Nations, need to provide all of the set of services, and they are woefully underfunded from a federal government perspective.
Oh, absolutely. And, I keep hearing a lot of really profound and unfortunate stories about, there's that chronic lack of funding and to be able to fund, technical services and people and infrastructure and stuff like that. So these are important source revenues to either supplement or direct, like outright fund some of these initiatives.
And you know what's interesting for me, and I didn't know this until a few years ago, but that a First Nation, for instance, can't reallocate. So if they get X number of dollars for housing, but they need addiction programming, they are not able to redirect their own funding towards that. So this revenue provides them a way to be autonomous and direct their funding to the needs of their community instead of having designate, well, you get this much for schools and this much for housing and this much for everything else that you do.
Yeah. And that's an important distinction, because the needs of communities are all different. They might need more in one area and more in the other. And the feedback we've heard, like in regards to some of those challenges, is that in addition to being underfunded, a lot of communities, a lot of the funding comes with so much prescription and so much criteria that it doesn't necessarily even, so if it's within education, it's not going necessarily to the right things or investing in right things and right outcomes. I've heard that that's changing a lot more, but still, where nations are starting to source fund, they're just leapfrogging a lot of those things, right? And achieving greater outcomes because of that self-determination.
And there's a deficit to catch up, right? You know, historically, I believe the number is a student on reserve gets 25% per capita funding of a student off reserve for education outcomes. You know, when you think about that, how do you fund teachers on a quarter of the budget? And that's just one example.
No, and I've heard the same for like things like water treatment. Like it's this big issue, and then why do we roads, right, and access and stuff, and why do we consistently why are our nations consistently underfunded? And then promise about doing things about it, right? Well, fund them appropriately. That's a good step. Back to this is really interesting. I think we understand it a lot better than maybe for those that are not Indigenous and part of the public. When we talked about loan guarantees and co-signing, and we have to make this clarification, and you can talk a little bit about it more. It's not because Indigenous people had, bad credit. We had no credit and no way to access to be able to build credit, or to build a balance, or to build assets. And can you tell us a little bit about more? Most of the Canadian public doesn't know that, right? So these programs are important because they're addressing this being left out of the economy, being actually not left out, being pushed out. The economy, making
held out. So First Nations do not own their land. They are on Crown land. And so when you think about, I'm going to go back to the simple example about how you build wealth, either through a business or personally. You take a mortgage on a home to buy a home. You take a loan out to start a business. First Nations people can't hold collateral in the same way because they don't own their land. And there's provisions in the Indian Act that prevents collateral being held on reserve. And so when you think about that, think about, like I said, the simple example about how you build your wealth and how much your home is worth out of most people's net worth. And when you're held out of that, also, you're not able to access RSPs and things like that in the same way because the tax structure is different. So there's all of these mechanisms that systematically have held Indigenous people out of the economy. And then once you're behind that economy, let's go back to the co-signing of the loan example. If you are a young person, you have no credit, or heaven forbid, you've had a misstep and you have weak credit, trying to get yourself out of that hole is next to impossible without some sort of step up. And so this is that step up. This is an opportunity to enable the Indigenous communities to catch up. And in a way that the reconciliation part is the lower interest rate, right? So it's the access to credit and it's lower interest rate. So it's a really amazing program. And what we're seeing is that people are really seeing the art of the possible. Corporate Canada is saying, hey, my Indigenous partners now can bring capital to the table like any of our other partners. So they're not looking for a handout anymore. They're looking for true partnership, and they're able to fulfill their parts of the goal. And so you're seeing these partnerships come together. And I believe the federal program exists partly because those same corporations went to the federal government and said, this is working in Alberta. This is working in Ontario. We need more of this. And so it is good for us.
Absolutely. And, we hear so many exciting ways in which it's good. And, I'm fortunate that I get to talk to a lot of different industry proponents and organizations and CEOs that are involved in a lot of these deals. And a lot of them talk about, now we have a partner that comes in, they bring capital, they invest. but we've already partnered with them in a variety of other ways to consolidate this aspect. Just makes so much more business sense for us, right? And so they're a preferred capital partner.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's really exciting.
And it really is just a strong partnership. You're sitting across the table as equals, or as much closer to equals than you were before.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's so many exciting things. And a lot of people talk about AIC. There's now loan guarantees. There's CIFC in Saskatchewan. I was actually involved in helping to stand it up. I had that huge honor. And there's guarantee programs being established everywhere. IRN advocated with a lot of other great organizations for a national program. Now there's a national program. And so there's, I think, and that had a lot to do with what was being tested and tried here through through the size of its fund and its mandate, and then of course through your leadership. And so, and we already talked a little bit about that, but what does that mean? We source funding. What does that mean for communities to get involved? And I want to touch upon this. What does it mean more than just, now you're an owner, but what does that bring communities aside from source revenues? How are they benefiting from this?
Well, I think the number one thing might be hope, optimism, right? There's a path forward now, and a path forward that is enabling communities to envision prosperity and not manage poverty. So again, if you just put yourself in, if you just take the household, I was a single mom for 5 years, and you think about how you're managing, day to day, and you're trying to figure out, you're just trying to make ends meet and get everything done there. When you're leveraging from a place of prosperity, how different that point of view is. And then you have an opportunity to invest. So instead of just trying to catch up and pay your bills, you're actually thinking forward about how to invest now your extra resources. And I think it's a magical time. And so we're seeing it all around us here at Enoch and other nations as well. My own nation, Frog Lake, is investing heavily in their infrastructure, water, roads, educating the school, to be able to teach Indigenous culture, but also provide our people with a path forward. And so the number one thing I think is that it's hope and opportunity, and a way to manage to prosperity. I think that's a critical outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that positive outlook, right? And that's incredible to start to think through things through that kind of that growth and that abundance versus that deficit and scarcity and like always kind of managing crisis, right?
Yeah.
It's a different mindset.
And I think about how it impacts the communities around the Indigenous communities. So then when I'm just going to use Enoch because we're here today, when Enoch is more prosperous, then all of West Edmonton benefits from that. And there's all kinds of people here from the western part of Edmonton seeking the services that are open in the offices here, that come to the restaurants, that come to the casino, that use the hotel. It's tremendous. And when you look at the facilities like Enoch, Grey Eagle, Métis Crossing, how prosperous they are, and then how they're making all the communities around them, those are just, really simple examples that I think that anyone can relate to. They drive economic opportunity. So now our nations and settlements and Métis communities are becoming economic drivers instead of
burdensome.
Barren. So now economic opportunity is thriving and growing out. And every single person in that region, in our province, in Western Canada, benefits from those new economic centers.
And that's incredible. That's so important. So, we talked quite a bit about, loan guarantees and the programs and the opportunities. What are some of the lessons learned through the work that you've done over the last few years?
I think we've helped show people the art of the possible. And I think we have helped. And I think all of the organizations in the Indigenous financial ecosystem have come together, worked together. So yourselves, FNNPC, FNFA, Canada Infrastructure Bank. What's really powerful is that this ecosystem is coming together. And now you're seeing, Cedar Leaf Capital form. You're seeing First Nations Bank expand and have Indigenous investment now. I think you're seeing all of those. Longhouse Capital in Vancouver, you're seeing the Indigenous financial ecosystem strengthen and build out. And what I am so proud about is our role in helping to support and work together with that whole ecosystem to make it stronger. We've worked together instead of competing against each other, instead of the loan guarantee programs. So many things in Canada have been built, pit region against region and province against province. I think the loan guarantee programs, both at the federal level and all the way across the country, have come together with a united mindset of working together for the same outcome. There's a real sense of family and collegiality right across the country with Indigenous leaders in this space. We're really working together to support each other, lift each other up, and with us, lift our communities and our country. And it's a really powerful time.
It absolutely is. Like, and one of the things that I've read that really stayed for me is when you see organizations that come from kind of that civil service perspective or community service perspective, the more you see them grow and coordinate and collaborate, it's a reflection of how healthier that communities are starting to get, right? And so, which is really exciting. There's capable people doing all sorts of incredible things across Canada, and that's one of the things I'm equally proud is a lot of our organizations are so eager to kind of learn from each other, to coordinate, to collaborate, and to bolster. I think we absolutely are, and I think there's certainly a lesson that goes back. The more coordination, the more collaboration, and organize around your intent as opposed to, kind of posturing, there's so much more you can achieve, right?
Yep.
Wow.
Right.
So
it's not easy. It's not an easy road.
No, it absolutely.
But I have a lot of confidence and optimism that we'll find our way through.
Oh, we are. It's, and that's probably a reflection of, the optimism we need as we advance like things like Bill C5 and how that moves together and ensuring it serves our communities appropriately. The lessons we can learn what the Indigenous community is doing, we can certainly see government and industry in our communities come together in meaningful ways as well, too.
These nation building projects, we should have undertaken them a long time ago. As a nation, we made ourselves very reliant on one trading partner, and we're seeing the folly of that now. But I think we really have an opportunity to assert our power, find our voice, our economic footing, and share with the broader world the great nation that Canada is. And so we just have to take advantage of the advantages that we have. And right now, Indigenous people are at the table in a way that we have never been before. And so we have this opportunity to move together as a nation, and everyone in the nation, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, really see the value and the opportunity in that. And so I think we will be able to move things forward in a way that we couldn't have envisioned 5 years ago.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And one of the ways that's happening is that we're seeing not just Indigenous organizations play a big role in that, but we're seeing Indigenous people playing more meaningful and bigger roles. You talked about being at the table. So let's talk about, I think first we'll talk about what it's like being, you're a very successful Indigenous woman in an important role, but you also sit in very important roles in terms of governance, right? And so you're a director for Cenovus, you're a director for Alamos Gold, and, you have that past experience with AIC. So tell us about the importance and being the CEO of an organization, tell us about the importance of seeing underrepresented people in these roles.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a great honor to serve on those boards. The province of Alberta has also asked me to sit on the board of the Heritage Fund, which is Alberta Sovereign Wealth Fund, which I think is a testament. They wanted a strong Indigenous voice at that table. And that's really about helping to plan for our future, our long-term future. And so honored to serve in that role as well. I want to take some examples of my time at Canadian Western Bank to share that with you. Earlier in my career, it's always very upfront about my Indigenous lineage, but I didn't, but I maybe was selective about who I shared that with. And when I was at CWB, I wrote a blog for National Indigenous Peoples Day and wrote about my Indigenous family, my Indigenous heritage, and all the things that meant for me. I was really nervous about that because there was almost 3,000 people across the country. All of a sudden, I was very vulnerable in that. The outpouring of support that I got was amazing. And I didn't really realize that I wasn't bringing my whole self to work until I was. And I felt accepted in a way that I never had in my professional career before. So that was a really powerful time. And I started with one of my colleagues, the Indigenous Employees Resource Group, the ERG there. And when I left CWB, I had people from other underrepresented groups reach out to me. And one lady in particular really stuck with me. And she just said, it's taken me almost 2 weeks to write you a note. She said, because I was so emotional about you leaving to take this role on. She said, I understand why you're going. She said, but I can't tell you the comfort that it gave me just knowing you were at the leadership table. And she wasn't
Yeah.
Indigenous. She was
Yeah.
from a different underrepresented group. Just having those voices at the table, that the comfort that is created, I don't think can be explained. And I had a member of the LGBTQ plus community that worked in one of the branches that I oversaw, and they wrote me a note and just said, I feel more seen and more heard because of your blog. And so helping to create a more welcoming space, helping to create a space where people can bring their whole selves to work. At AIOC, we actually have a very rich diversity of staff members, Métis, First Nation, right across all of the varying spectrums in a pretty small group. And I'm so proud that we have created an environment where all Canadians feel comfortable, all Indigenous people feel comfortable within our Indigenous culture and with the work that we're trying to do.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's a powerful story. Creating space. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but the rising tide raises all canoes, right?
Yes. Yes.
And it's important to embrace that. And it really comes back to that first point that you make, that sense of responsibility, but just take that next best step. And maybe we should revisit it, because that's really fascinating. We talked about, because I've had that experience too. I used to see people in these positions and I couldn't imagine myself there. So I
Yes.
couldn't imagine it as something I could do. And I don't know where it changed in my life. As like, I have nothing but gratitude. I'm like, yeah, I'm in this position, or I'm doing this thing. I'm at this place. I'm sitting with this person, and there's gratitude there.
And you also look around and go, wow, I can't believe I'm in the same room with all these amazing people.
Yeah,
I do that.
And I find this is very, again, another consistent thing with Indigenous people, and maybe reflective of kind of that dark past or whatever. But
I still call my dad and I say, guess what?
I know.
Guess what I did today?
I know. My father and my mother and my father absolutely at the same time. And it's to the point where why? Yeah. It doesn't surprise me, but this is incredible. And it's like, wow, and stuff. Me, I always tell people, I have nothing but gratitude, and largely because I've always looked through everything. Even getting to talk with you is such an honor. And I look through this experience through the eyes of that little boy from Cumberland House.
Yes.
And that never changes, right? And so wonder, gratitude, but at the same time, I'm confident and assertive. You deserve to be where you are.
You don't have imposter syndrome, but at the same time, you still appreciate where you are.
Absolutely. I don't know if that was always the case. And maybe, you had an experience as you came into that blog and things like that. What could we learn from that? What could we tell, younger Indigenous people, not necessarily younger, but that are stuck in that place? How do we move past that, where we don't have to forget who we are? Always look through the world of the eyes of the person where you came from, but at the same time realize your position in this world is really within your hands and the hands of the community.
So I was so fortunate. I had parents that told me often, I can be whatever I want to be and just go for it. And when I was young, my mom would say, don't let those boys get you down. You are as tough as them. You just go for it. They really instilled in me belief in myself and belief in my abilities. I have a wonderful husband that also really believes in me and encourages me to believe in myself. And I think I draw on that a lot. And then also, I firmly believe you are where you're meant to be. And so when we have challenges, the road is not easy in leadership roles of any kind. The road is not easy along the way. I firmly believe that we are where we're meant to be and we can overcome any challenges. So the challenges that are in front of us are there because we can overcome them. And so, we talked about, I said I went through single motherhood, a difficult marital breakdown with, younger children. At that point in my life, I just thought I will be, I lost my mother through that period as well. I just thought I'm going to be a single mom forever and I'm just going to hold on and just get through, right? And just, it'll be me and the girls and we'll find our way, but we're going to be tight into that family unit. And I focused on gratitude and just taking the next best opportunity and trying to build us the best life that I could. But, there was a period there where I really felt like I was crawling on my knees, hands and knees through broken glass. But that period gave me the strength to go through other hard times. So I'm like, well, it wasn't as bad as that. And you made it, and things can work out in ways that you could never even have fathomed. So just focusing on that next best step, really focusing on love, gratitude, and that you are where you're meant to be and you can overcome it. And sometimes you just have to focus on getting through that day the best you can and try again the next day, the best that you can every day. And that's gotten me through a lot of really difficult times.
Yeah, and I think there's so much it's important there for anyone to hear is like we see all these incredible successful people and and we should still identify if we can with a person. There's commonalities and everything, but not necessarily think I can't do that because I'm dealing with this incredible different thing, because all those people we see out there, yourself, myself, we've overcome some incredible challenges, right?
And I think I'm there because of those challenges.
Yes.
So those challenges gave me the strength to get to where I am today, and sometimes to get through the hard times as a leader. Please think of a quote that says, "It's not happening to you, it's happening for you." And so you will walk on the shoulders of your ancestors. You will walk on the strength that you've created by overcoming adversity. And in the words of Sir Winston Churchill, that has gotten me through a lot, when you're going through hell, keep going. Just keep going. And you think about the buffalo facing into the storm, right? They're the ones that walk into a storm instead of away. Just keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah. Someone, once told me, is like, it's inevitable in life you're going to fall. And I think, aligned with what you're talking about, but choose to fall forward and like make that step forward and learn from that experience, and don't waste that crisis, and learn from that. And I think it really reflects a lot of what you talked about, that and you mentioned that mindset. I think that's incredibly important for people to hear as well too, is that we can choose to be a victim, or we can choose to really see things as they're happening for us, not to us, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important lesson for people to hear as well.
To not be like the victim, because sometimes you really want to.
I know. Life can...
And sometimes I let myself feel like that for just a day or a half a day. You're like, I'm going to wallow just for a little bit. And then I'm going to get up and I'm going to face the world again. And whatever happens, happens. And you'll find your way. But I also try to find a little bit of joy in every day. And sometimes that joy might just be a walk outside. I have a puppy. She's like one of my big joys, and walking the trees every day. I live in a place where there's access to green space, and I just make sure that I can drink in the fresh air and the sunshine whenever I can, and that really helps to reset and just find the wonder in the world again, and then come back at it.
Yeah, that's an incredible lesson. Like, make sure we're all gonna have those tough days, but make sure we save space and time to find that joy.
Can I tell you about my joy jar?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this happened in one of my darkest hours. I had lost my mother suddenly. I talked about being newly divorced, young daughters, and now I had suddenly lost my mother, all in a period of 7 months. And so I had heard about this joy jar. And so I went and bought a jar. It was like New Year's Day or January 2nd. And I went and bought a clear glass jar, and I bought a bunch of colored sticky notes. And I try to every day, but maybe not quite every day, I write down my joys, and it's a joy jar. And then every December 31st, I open the jar and I go through my year. And what I was so amazed was, even in the darkest days of COVID, that jar was full. And I purposely make it brightly colored sticky notes so it looks happy. And I keep it in my kitchen so that I can see it, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I've got it. I'm like, I must have had a joy today or yesterday. What were the joys? And sometimes they were the most simple things. The girls came home from school happy. We had a good day. They won a game, went for a walk. Like, it's amazing how the small things really truly are the difference in our world. And so the joy jar has been a magical way for me to focus on the positive.
And reconnect, and joy doesn't have to be these big grandiose things. And really the true joy is, yes, in those little things we might take for granted, right? And and it really is looking at kind of the world through the eyes with having so much gratitude, right? And so that's incredible.
So I've been doing that since I started it January 2017, and I still do it.
That's incredible. That's awesome. Yes, that's a great way to kind of reflect on not only being intentional about finding it, but also to reflect and look at all
Sometimes when I've had fun with people, I'll take a picture of the note on New Year's Eve and I'll send to them. I'm like, remember when we did this, right?
Cool.
And they're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that, it's and then that's just my way of spreading it.
That's awesome. So hopefully, September 17th, you're looking at it as like, oh, see here, John, here's a picture. Joy sat together and had a great conversation.
Why not?
Well, we've touched on a lot of things. We've talked about where you're from, your career path, what led you to AIOC. We talked about AIOC, its mandate and its impact in community. Um, and then what does leadership mean? And then of course set the stage in terms of talking about, the tables you get to sit at and how that you get to lead and provide, your expertise and through your lived and learned experience. And then we come back kind of to the individual and how do we live a meaningful life, right? So that we, through purpose, through gratitude, be intentional in finding joy and everything like that. And, and so what does this all mean? I think we'll kind of bring this all together. What does this mean for you? How do you see you continuing to move this forward? This having this joy, this sense of responsibility, this purpose, and just doing that next best things. What does the next 5 years look like for Chana Martineau?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a really hard one.
Right?
So I think first about our family unit. So I think about all of those things and how we've tried to incorporate that into our family unit. I have two great stepkids in addition to my own children, and my husband. And so we're really, I feel like a solid family unit. And so I'm trying to instill in them all the great things that were instilled in me about following their dreams. It was funny. My younger daughter said that to me back, the youngest of our four, said that back to me. She said, "Mom, you always tell us to follow our dreams. You need to make sure you're following your dreams too."
Oh,
so
awesome.
Powerful.
Oh, to hear that from your kids. Wow.
I know.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, it's working first of all. But anyway, and so, I start there, having a healthy, happy family unit, a base from which everyone can launch. I call our house the launch pad. They launch, they come back. They launch again, they fly for a while sometimes, and they need to come back and home to roost a little bit. And then they go again in the world. And so most important is that important family unit. Then leading an organization in the AIOC that our employees can feel that strength, that power, the support to grow their careers, to follow their dreams, to also help Indigenous people along the way. And so I always say what a privilege it is to be able to do wonderful work for wonderful people but grow professionally at the same time. We have a fantastic board of directors. Anyway, I think it's just one of the best things about my job is I get to help that. And then I get to help bring the Indigenous lens to my board roles. And so, I'm there as a director. My fiduciary duty is to the corporations that I serve, but also I think a little differently than many other corporate directors. I've had a different lived experience. And so, I guess I feel honored that they're happy to have me at the table. They are wonderful groups of people. I feel so privileged to work with all of them, honestly. And then you just try to contribute in the best way that you can and what's appropriate for that organization at the time. And then I think when you have great intentions and you live with your values, then good things come.
What a great way to wrap it up. If you live with your values, right? Lead with your values, make choices with your values, good things will come. Well, Shivers, that's awesome. I try to live much the same way. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I always enjoy seeing the work that you do and always enjoy the opportunity we have. We've shared, the seed a couple times on panels, and I hope there's more opportunities like that in the future. But any opportunity I can to have a chat with you is truly an honor. It's an honor for, the organization, the Indigenous Resource Network, and wish you nothing but the success in the organizations that you serve.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chana Martineau. I'm the CEO of the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. I'm a proud member of Frog Lake First Nation, and I'm a proud supporter of the Indigenous Resource Network.